Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I have to say, I've come to really I really look forward to these roughly monthly-ish thingies that we're doing. So welcome back to the Caregiver series. We've been doing these monthly webinars on various subjects. The Caregiver one is now a series. So this is a repeat in a way. As usual, if there are new folks out there, the way these things work is simply I'll start with some slides to kind of level set, get some basic sort of stuff out there, just level set. And then the fun part is the second half of the dealio together when we're, in dialogue. So questions, comments are very welcome. I'm gonna cut to Sonia in a second on that note. But before I do that, I wanted to say, so speaking of caregiver things, so we at Mettle we realize there's many, I'd say most of our clients are caregivers versus patients. We get a smattering, but anyway, we're increasingly in tune with the needs of caregivers one way and another. And so one thing we're thinking about doing is maybe by summer we'll be ready to start some cohorts, group of a handful of people at a time to go over time through time together, and to lean into caregiving, the practice of caregiving, and have a place to sort of check in as a small group. So we'll stay tuned. We got to figure out the details and when we'll be starting that, but I just want to mention that for now. Okay, I'm gonna cut over to Sonia for a little technical download.
Thank you, BJ. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Just wanted to let you know the 2 ways that you can ask questions after BJ's done with his little spiel. You can raise your hand, that's up in the top area. And if you raise your hand, we will unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. Or if you don't feel like speaking out loud to the group, you can type in your question in the question box and we will read it aloud and answer it for you. Just a heads up, if you've been here before, you've gone through this, but for new people, sometimes we don't get to all of the questions within the hour. And if that's the case, we will save your questions and we will record a second session afterwards and we'll send out a recording to that. So please, we apologize in advance if we can't get to you, but please know we will answer your question one way or another. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Okay. By the way, Mom and Dad, I know you're out there. I'm sorry I didn't get to shaving before the webinar. I know I'm going to hear about that, but I love you. Okay, guys. So, what the heck does this mean? What does it mean to take on the role of caregiver? It is a big deal. It is not. Those of you who are caregivers out there, I don't need to describe. It is sort of a total job on so many levels. There are practical components, emotional, social, relational components. It will affect your own life outside of the caregiving world. There's a lot to it. I just need to name that. Otherwise, we might go into this role, this act, this love with unrealistic expectations. Caregiving can be an amazing experience and at the same time very difficult. It almost always is both. So, okay, so we said, again, sort of get our bearings a little bit. So there are the practical tidbits of caregiving. This is sort of the official range. And this activities of daily living is a sort of industry phrase. It gets at sort of the basics of activities of a day of daily living. But this means things sort of in terms of qualifying for certain levels of home care, will relate back to things like ADLs. So just note that there's an official sort of medical insurance designation around these things too. But for each of us as caregivers, it's just to note this is sort of the range of practical things any of us may be asked to do. They run the range from bathing, dressing, eating, transfer. I know you guys can read, toileting, and continence. These are the big ones, the big 6. But that's not it. I mean, and each of these, of course, they may sound basic and therefore simple, but they can get very difficult, of course, when the person you're caring for, caring with, may be very heavy, or may be awkward, or may be in a lot of pain, or very sensitive to touch, or may be very, very weak, and so not able to assist you in assisting them. So moving in and out of bed to a chair, or chair to standing, or moving from the bed to a commode, or getting all the way to the bathroom, you name it. These things that in the rest of life can feel like, well, things we take for granted. In the zone we're talking about here, these are no longer things we can take for granted. That's part of the deal. So just to say, these may be simple, but they're not easy. And one of the things that can happen, especially around the physical work of caregiving, is you can get injured. You can hurt yourself. It's very common, back injury, back strain, helping to lift someone, etc. So there are kinetically, there are right ways, or ergonomically, there are right ways to do these things and not so right ways. Physical therapists, occupational therapists tend to know this stuff very, very well. So if you have access to a PT, and if you're entering into this role, you may be able to talk to them about sort of the basics, sort of, like I say, ergonomics of doing these kinds of activities. But be very careful. It's not uncommon that people injure themselves caring for another person. So this deserves its own slide. I mean, besides sort of the practical logistics, and by the way, there are other practical logistics too. Of course, running errands, making meals, keeping the house, all sorts of things that go into daily life that aren't on the ADL list, that may be in your purview as a caregiver. But the one that's sort of underneath all of those practical activities, no matter what the needs are, is this one, this idea of bearing witness. And that phrase, I can't tell if I love that phrase or not, because it sounds kind of highfalutin or maybe even religious or something, I'm not sure. But it does give the sort of act of seeing someone a gravitas that it deserves. I mean, you guys tell me what you think, but I don't think, in terms of humans caring for humans, I'm not so sure there's anything higher than just seeing each other. And I don't mean noticing the hairdo, or I don't know, but I mean really seeing, actively looking, noticing everything, including the hard stuff. Caregiving and illness can come with all sorts of sights and smells that can get tricky. That's part of the deal too. But daring to sort of not run away, and daring to see someone in all their pain and all their glory and all their multitudes, really see them and not judge them. If we can be careful around that, that's where things get into trouble. But if we can see each other and not judge each other, I honestly think that is one of the holiest things we can do, no matter what your belief system is. But I think one of the most sacred things we can do for each other. And on the receiving end, I hope we all get through our lives with at least one person for one moment truly seeing us, like really, really seeing us for everything that we are. Okay, we can go on and on about this one, but it's big, big stuff. Actually, one more thing to note about it. So much of the stuff of caregiving is on the list, like ADLs, of stuff to do. This is one that's, yeah, it's active, but really what we're talking about here is accompaniment, or being with another person, not strategically looking for means to ends or having goals all over the place. But this one requires sort of stillness, settling in, paying attention subtly, really actively paying attention. So this is more along the lines of being, not just the doing stuff. So various roles that come up in the caregiving spectrum. Being an advocate, I think caregiving is inherently sort of advocacy work. You are looking out on behalf of another person. That includes, in this world, advocating for them. As we know, especially in the healthcare system, you have to, squeaky wheels get the grease. Sometimes you have to sort of, with the pace and frenetic activity around healthcare and the multiple agendas going on, sometimes you really, as a caregiver, really need to insert yourself, stand up for your person. There's not a lot of malevolence in healthcare, but there's a lot of distraction and busyness and overwhelm. So sometimes you got to really, scream and shout to get attention. And sometimes that falls to the caregiver. That may not be in your temperament. And caregiving should maybe stretch us, but never pull us out of ourselves. Then we get into trouble, then we burn out, and then demoralization, all sorts of things can happen. So we got to bring ourselves along in this mix too. So you may feel shy and maybe not your sort of the way you roll, sort of being a squeaky wheel. But a lot of people find it easier to do that on behalf of someone they care about than for themselves. I've seen that a lot. So, but also to say, none of us can do all of these things brilliantly. So also caregiving often ends up being something of a team sport. So maybe the loudmouth in the family or in the friend bunch is the advocate. But anyway, one way or another, advocacy is a really important piece of, formally or informally, loudly or not, advocacy is a big piece of this puzzle, standing up for someone. Proxy, now that word takes us to taking a little bit more of an official role. So proxy is another word for durable power of attorney for healthcare. So that is an official designation that I would designate my proxy, someone who's close to me, who knows me, with whom I'm in touch, who can speak for me when I can no longer speak for myself. That's really the role of the proxy. It's sort of advocacy taken to another level. You are really actually speaking for the person, not just looking out for them. And this requires, being a proxy requires navigating your own feelings and thoughts, but also being able to see past them through to what your person, the patient, the person you're caring for, you're representing them as a proxy in large part. Again, that doesn't mean abandoning yourself, and in family structures that can get tricky. But really the role of the proxy is to speak on behalf of another person. Okay. So caregiving is, as with all this stuff, language is tricky and annoying, and we use the same words to mean different things, especially in healthcare all the time. So caregiver, some of us don't see ourselves in that role, especially family members and friends. We may not see ourselves as caregivers, but we mean that word that word includes family and friends, the way we mean it, just to keep clear. In Europe, I've heard people use the word carer, like one who cares, a carer versus a caregiver. I kind of like that in getting away from the giver, because it's not just giving. We'll circle back to that point. It's receiving too. This is a relationship. A caregiving patient relationship is a dynamic, is a relationship. Your role is not just to be rooted as yourself. Your role is to be in dynamic with another person. So that is a relationship. So it's not just giving, it's giving and receiving. So caregiver gets a little something of a misnomer, but it's the word we use and colloquially in this country. So we'll stick with it for now anyway. So when we say informal caregivers, that means unpaid, essentially, family and friends. All right, these are people in our circle already. That's informal caregivers. Formal caregivers, that's people who are paid, essentially, professional caregivers. So that includes, on some level, by some definition, doctors, nurses, social workers, chaplains, the whole sort of clinical crew. But most of the time, when we hear that word caregiver in the medical and the healthcare sense, we're usually talking about the direct care workforce. That's the name of it, direct care workforce. That's the sort of base level of the professional totem pole of caregiving. So the direct care workforce is personal care attendants, certified nursing assistants, home health aides. Okay, these are different sort of types of direct care workforce, all very closely related. CNAs tend to work in a facility, for example. Home health aides work at home, but the skill set is much the same. The pay is much the same, which is to say it's generally lousy. The support tends to be lousy. The regulations are pretty minimal. It's in the same tranche as babysitting from the U.S. government's point of view. So it's a huge world that we are incredibly dependent on, and like so many things, because we're so dependent on this workforce, we don't notice this workforce. That's a paradox of human life, modern life, I don't know, but it happens all the time. So formal caregivers, invaluable work, but we haven't found a way to treat that work as invaluable in society. So that's another conversation. But anyway, this is sort of the range of caregivers. So hopefully you see yourself somewhere in there. And this is just to mention, I think our earlier, a lot of this is redundant to earlier parts of this series, but this one's a little bit, we added this slide because I like to think that caregiving, to frame it in this exalted, hard but beautiful, that we all want to be there for each other. You just have to find a way to do it with the logistics of our lives and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, that's not fair. That suits many. But there are plenty of people who find themselves in a caregiver role who really don't want to be there. Family structures are fraught, and sometimes by duty or whatever else, or by economic dependency, or all sorts of other ways, people find themselves in the caregiver role, caring for someone whom they don't really love, whom they don't really and by themselves in some way care about on some level. So we need to misname that. That actually, of course, can be very tricky. It's one thing to navigate all this when love is fueling this relationship, but when that's not there, of course, you can't force love. You can't force affection. So how do you do? What do you do? Well, I don't have any great answers, but for our purposes today, we just need to note that significant bundle of people who fit this bill, and that can be extra lonely making and extra alienating. So, all right. Caregiving and work. Another thing, we just a new slide in our little deck here. We just need to note this. It's brutally hard. The sandwich generation, you may hear more and more of the sandwich generation, folks around my age, 50-ish, who have a job and at home are caregiving at home. So there are millions of people who fit this bill. By the way, I think there's something like 50 million unpaid informal caregivers in this country. And that's an enormous number and growing. And that's a silent workforce. So a lot of people are having to hold down jobs and then go home and to continue work of another sort. Here again, very difficult. We can talk about medical leave and other ways to make that work with your HR department. But just to note, this is a significant barrier to good caregiving is you have other roles, other jobs, other tasks to do. Okay. So this I noted a little earlier. We don't need to belabor it here, but so it's very common. The people who are attracted to caregiving, often you'll find these folks in the health professions, who make their vocation around caring for other people. It's not uncommon among that group of people, and I suppose that's I and my colleagues are in part of that group. A lot of us struggle. We feel like it's a choice, like it's a service. I am here for this person. I'm not here for myself. There's this sort of pride that can come from almost like it's funny, we do this with like to show how much we care can sometimes some of the currency to show that can be sort of self-neglect, like as though this love and care is sort of zero sum. There's only so much. So I care so much, I'm going to give all that love to this person. I don't need any for myself. Well, and there's a phrase that's thrown around called pathological altruism in healthcare, and a lot of people fit that bill. You know what? And it doesn't work very well over time. Despite all that devotion, the truth of the matter is we, patients or caregivers, are human beings, fleshy people with our own needs and our own wants and our own stresses, etc. And ignoring ourselves on behalf of somebody else is no favor in the end. That's when we burn out. That's when we're empty. That's when we're running on fumes. That's when our mood gets short. That's when we start treating our patients accidentally like they're luggage rather than humans. I mean, it gets really difficult. So here again, I'm saying this, we want to note this, but it's very difficult. A lot of caregivers are probably sitting there going, yeah, great. Well, how am I going to make time for that? I got work, I got kids, I got this person to care about. Sounds great, but how am I going to do that? Well, I don't have an easy answer to that, but I just need to note that it should be a priority. Self-care falls to the bottom of the list for so many people. It needs to be near the top. Even if your goal is to be the most loving, caring, kind person, it's extra incumbent on you to take care of yourself so that you have something to give. So all those people out there are gunning to be the most selfless person in the world, you still need to find a way to tend to yourself, even on behalf of another person. It's just the way humans, we have needs, and we can ignore that, but not for long. Sorry, I jumped ahead. Okay, so let me come out of here and then we can get over to the questions, guys. That's the end of the general basic fundamental gist here, but let's get over to conversation and Q&A.
We do have one question that was typed in the question box that I can read out. Do you know of any action being taken to facilitate the paid aspect of caregiving? This person's state has a 1.5-year wait list because the bucket hasn't been funded. And this is about federal waiver 19 program requires nursing home level of care for a caregiver to be paid. Do you have any?
I don't. I must say right out of the chutes, but I'm really grateful for your question because there is active, so we'll go look this up. We need to learn too, because there are active policy things happening It is certainly a political issue by virtue of being a policy issue, and that is up. There are people who are moving bills through House and Senate. At the federal level, I'm not sure what's going at the state level, but your question gives us an excuse to go digging. So maybe, Sonia, you and I can look, and then we'll maybe record an answer to this question, if that's okay.
Yep, that sounds good. And then there's another note from someone. It's not a direct question. I just want to call it out. It's a question about children acting as caregivers. So we will make an effort to put that into the next caregiver discussion. I just want to give that, again, same thing, the research and thought to go into it. Thank you for that question.
Right on. So what else, guys? Anyone want to share a story about their own caregiving? Or if we have people out there, you know, most of us through our lives are going to be both patients and caregivers. So also welcome in our conversation, guys, is what it feels like to be cared for. You know, what's it like on the receiving end? So don't be shy, patients out there. If nothing's coming up, I'll just keep talking here. So I've certainly...
One second, I've got someone, sorry about that. Let's see. Jennifer, 1 second, let me find you here. Okay. Jennifer, I am unmuting you, and you may have to unmute yourself on the other end. It might take a quick second. There you are. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So I might be asking a question that has no answer. I am getting ready to move back to the Bay Area to just be with my stepmom, my parent, as she ages. And I'm in that sort of transition zone, and she got a cancer diagnosis yesterday. So things are accelerating. You know, before it was sort of like, oh, good, I want to be there for you. And now the need is different. Anyway, part of so I have like a ton of emotions and thoughts. And one of the things that's tricky for me in my relationship with her is that we don't always seem to interpret things in the same way, particularly around some of her medical history. And I mean, just speaking real, I think she's dramatizes things at times, or I can't relate to like the experience that she says she's having. And so again, that's sort of like, I don't know that there's an answer here, but I guess the topic is sort of roughly like what to do when you're caregiving for somebody and you don't see the same reality in a situation, like how to negotiate that.
Such a good question, Jennifer, and very common, you know, in subtle and not consequential ways and in hugely consequential ways. It is, so you're describing a variation on a common theme. So, I mean, let's just think about this together a little bit. I mean, so one thought, and I so appreciate your candor. That's exactly what these hours are together, these sessions, these webinar thingies. This is meant to be a safe place to actually get real, speak our minds, our feelings, say things that may be hard to hear, but we need to say, whatever it is. So I really appreciate you taking the lead. So first to note is, you know, underneath all this stuff, of course, we're people and we have personalities and quirks and traits and things. So I don't know when the last time you spent a lot of time with your stepmom. So you might just be bumping into some personality tweaks that you hadn't seen before that are like now going to be a little bit more consequential because maybe you're spending more time together, et cetera. So maybe that, but because you do get to know each other in new ways through this. This is a very vulnerable exchange, and you will probably see new sides of each other. And I say each other because that will go both ways, like we're saying. The other thing to note with this sort of drama thing, that's also not uncommon that when we get sick or lonely, we may tend to the dramatic because sometimes, and I'm speaking in generalities, obviously here, because of course, sometimes what we're having a very dramatic experience, no matter what it looks like to the outside. And so maybe that is just an honest portrayal to her. That's how it feels to her, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this other thing, there's nothing surprising there, but there's this other thing to note that your comment prompted in me. And I've seen myself do it as a patient. I've seen many patients do it. I've seen my family do this, which is because healthcare, our doctors, everybody, the whole system could be so harried. And because it can feel like there's no place for my personality, my you know, what's the word I'm looking for? But anyway, so much gets lopped off in the clinical exchange. We're talking about sort of life or death sort of things, and daily life kind of falls by the wayside. Our emotions kind of fall by the wayside. A sense of proportionality. I, as a patient, may divulge something that is incredibly meaningful to me as a patient, but doesn't really matter to the doctors. Like, doesn't matter what he's going to be prescribing you. So you may be divulging this incredibly sensitive, exquisite thing to yourself, and it just is completely lost to the doctor. They're on a different wavelength. I don't mean to make excuses for that, but it happens a lot. And especially around symptoms like pain, when people aren't listening to your pain, we tend to like, okay, we either sort of sclerose down and go inward, and it's not a great feeling, or we're like, screw this, and we get more dramatic. So I'm not saying this is going on here, but it happens not infrequently that patients and others can take on a sort of dramatic flair, almost like theater, to try to get people to pay attention. That is not uncommon. So I don't know if that's going on here, but just to note a force that happens. So, but on to your point here, the bigger point, what to do when there's differences of opinion within this dynamic. Well, so from my point of view as sort of a medical person in this world, the first thing I would do when I bump into that situation is, first of all, make sure, are we on the same page? Are you guys both hearing and receiving the same information? Maybe sometimes the difference of opinion is born of a difference of understanding. So the first thing to check in is, are you guys really understanding the same thing in the same way or a similar way? So that'd be the first thing to check in, and especially on medical stuff gets so complicated, and it's not uncommon for there to be plenty of misunderstandings along the way, or just different understandings. So I would kind of try to get in your frame of mind and her frame of mind and try to see how they are conflicting, and maybe try to kind of communicate our way through there and resolve these sort of differences of opinion by resolving the differences of understanding. Okay, that's one step you can do. Another would be beyond that, and may still be, just might be looking at the exact same thing in much the same way, but having different opinion what to do about it. That is also very common. And once we're there, well, then it's usually a matter of both parties being heard still, because it's just therapeutic. We need to be heard and seen. We need to get our feelings up and out. So maybe it's as simple as just facilitating each party just saying their piece. And then from there, sometimes an alignment lights up. Barring any of those sort of ways to narrow the gap between you and stepmom, could be simply, well, at some point, at least the way we're wired here in the US, there's a prize around autonomy. So ultimately, if she is thinking clearly, if she has a decision-making capacity, which is sort of a medical legal definition, well, then it's her life. And ultimately, you may find yourself in a position of deferring to her. You're saying things like, I would want to do differently, Ma, but it's your life. Okay. So ultimately, if it really comes down to it, if those opinions can't be resolved by a kind of better understanding, the patient generally deserves the deference. Now that's countered by, yeah, but that doesn't mean you, Jennifer, have to be everything to her and have to put yourself on the side. So you can still have your opinions. I would encourage you to communicate that, like, hey, Ma, that's not how I would do it. And it freaks me out a little bit or whatever, just being honest and real, but okay, I'll do what I can. Or if you can, in good faith, do what she's needing or what she's hoping for, then maybe the role for you might be helping to find other carers, other people who can help, and sort of offloading pieces that don't jive with how you're feeling, where it's sort of stretching you in ways that don't feel healthy. Well, sometimes you can sort of find a different person to tend to that issue. So anyway, long-winded answer to your very important question and statement. I don't know, Jennifer, are you still there? Does anything in that line up? Was there any counterpoint to what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think, you know, part of why I hesitated of like, oh, I don't know if there's actually an answer to this is because the dynamic I described is just life, right? Like we all have relationships where that happens. And so to some extent, it's like you're just doing the same thing you do in all of those relationships, is try to figure out how to be as authentic and legitimate and in integrity. But what I really appreciate in your response too is that idea of like, that kind of check-in of, are we getting the same information? I think that's going to be really important for me, especially because right now, as like a lot is over the next couple of weeks, a lot more is going to become known, but I'm still 2,300 miles away right now.
Gotcha.
And so I think I need to be really clear about asserting myself into the information stream, and as much as possible, not relying on sort of the game of telephone of, oh, well, this is what the doctor said. I think that that will be a very practical thing that is going to be important.
Amen. Yeah, if you can get to those appointments with the source, and the source of information probably is the doctor in this case, being, you know, when you're out here or video joining those meetings so you're hearing the same words from the same mouth. I would say not only like misunderstanding is I would say is certainly very common. It's so common, I would say it's actually the norm. I would presume misunderstanding. I think just in daily life, you like you pointed out, I think we should presume misunderstanding. It's just usually not very consequential. My sense is we're involved in hundreds of misunderstandings a day in a normal day. So yeah, so getting back to the source of information and hearing the same thing at the same time, but also being in a position to ask questions, to ask the doctor, push back and say, well, what do you mean by this word? So with your mother-in-law here, or stepmom, I'm sorry if I keep misspeaking, it's going to make a big difference if this diagnosis is, you know, early stage cancer and treatable, and she's interested and able to get treated, and this could be a bump on the road. Or if it's a metastatic diagnosis or other things going on, this could be a real inflection moment. And they beg different sensitivities and different energies and different sort of hour amount of time spent. So yes, I think you're wise to stay sort of really agile and see and not conclude much of anything until you're on the ground with mom and hearing the same news and getting clear on what exactly is the situation. A lot will flow from that.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate the question very much. And are you on your way to the Bay Area? Is that what I heard? We may have lost you, but anyway, I think I heard you on your way to the Bay Area. So almost welcome home here.
Right. Thank you. I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Okay, guys, any other comments or questions out there, or any sort of scenarios to talk through?
Yeah, we've got some questions in the chat, the typed up chat that I can read to you. This person says, I'm struggling with the person I care for. I feel like it unleashes the understandable frustration and anger they feel onto me. I feel like all I can do is take it because of everything they're going through, but I also do feel like it is fair to take it. Now I tend to not say anything because I don't feel like I can say anything right. My question is it expected to just take it because a terminal illness is worse than anything I'm going through?
Oh, God, good one. I mean, boy, do we get in trouble when we start comparing and contrasting our sufferings. You know, who deserves what? It's so tricky. I mean, this is where we have to this is where I should probably make a slide for this. Like one of the major jobs of good caregiving, one of your tasks is self-awareness. So you're being able to read your own signals. Am I annoyed here because I'm being insulted? Am I annoyed here because this person isn't receiving my love as I intended? Am I annoyed here because I'm just exhausted? Am I unappreciated? That's very common. And so, you know, in short, a short answer to your question is no, I don't think you just need to take it. But I do think you need to read your audience and pick your battles and other phrases like that. So if this person is nearing the end, very frail, not necessarily tracking all the time, sort of in and out, well, it may be asking too much to kind of resolve that conversation and sort of feedback and say, hey, you know, when you do that, it makes me feel X, Y, and Z. And if we're going to work this together like this, I really need you to watch this, or I need you to hear me, or the audience, note your audience. So if the person's just not able to have that kind of conversation, doesn't have the sort of capacity to think on these levels, well, then I wouldn't ask her, because then you're putting them in a position that would just confuse them, and you're unlikely to get what you need back. But for the most part, even in situations where your person is frail and in and out, I'd still encourage you to sort of respectfully, sort of not in the moment. If you find yourself getting really heated up, like in the rest of life, step back, step out for a second, go for a walk, ground yourself, because what you don't want to do is just spray emotion if you can help it. Take a minute, check in with yourself, and come back and sort of in the sober way say, hey, I really need to talk, and I know I just need to say these things, and I'm, because I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. And, you can kind of try to open up these kinds of conversations. And if I say that to someone and I realize, and I watch them falling asleep, or they're, having hallucinations or whatever else, then I know to back off. But because even with delirium, there's moments of lucidity. So you can have these little windows of time to actually break through in conversation with people. And so I'd encourage you to try it. If you're not getting what you need, just read the signals in real time and back off and let it go if you can. So it's not an easy, there's no pat answer to your very important question, but I don't think the answer, from where I said, I know the answer is not just take it. Find a way to try to resolve it with the person. Barring that, find a way to off-gas it somewhere for yourself rather than just internalizing it. This is how we beat the crap out of ourselves over time, or we get beaten up over time. So that angst you're feeling is real. You should respect it. It's just as you're respecting it coming out of their mouths. You should respect your own feelings and deal with them. If you can't get direct communication with the person, talk to a therapist, talk to a friend, write it out, paint it out, do something with these feelings, because they are real too. They're no less deserving than the feelings of the person you're caring for. The only difference is there just may not be practical space to kind of come to some shared realization together. But that doesn't make your feelings and thoughts any less real. So treat them with the same amount of respect. It's really, really key. No, caregiving ultimately should not be a sort of ultimately shouldn't be a pure sacrifice. Again, I'm putting us back to this is a relationship. It's a dynamic. It's a two-way street, etc. So, but shout back if I'm missing the question or if that just feels impractical as an answer.
Okay, let's see. We've got a hand up. You may know this person, Susan Miller.
Yep. Hi, mommy.
Susan, do you want to unmute yourself?
Mama. Is she being shy or something else?
Might just be technical. Susan, it looks like you have to unmute yourself on your end if you want to go ahead and do that. And if not, we can try you again in a moment. Okay, let's try one other person. Brittany, you've got your hand up. Let me unmute you here.
Hi.
Hi, Brittany.
Hello,
Hi.
Brittany.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my first time joining in these conversations today, so thank you.
Welcome.
I have a question or just, I guess, seeking advice, but it's not related to end-of-life caregiving. It's related to long-term disability and caring for a child that's approaching teen age that has long-term disability that will be increasingly debilitating over his life. So I guess I've been a caretaker since he was born, really, but in that transition now where it's very natural as a parent to be a caregiver to a young child, but in that tricky point now where maybe not so natural, the things that you have to do for a preteen teen. And I'm at a phase where I'd really like to have some advice from this community and from yourself about what kind of plan that I could be creating both for him and for myself and his brothers as we look towards the future. I mean, in all categories, really, the medical support, any kind of help, and also just emotional support that we can have for him as he starts to realize the impact of his own disabilities as he navigates the rest of his life.
Right on. Yeah. Thank you, Brittany. Yeah, obviously this is my word of the day is dynamic. So very dynamic relationship. There's so many sort of hats you're wearing as mom, as caregiver, as mother to other kids, and who knows else what you're doing. So complicated. And part of the way this gets really difficult is sort of the role switching. You know, my mom now, my caregiver now, and my nurse now, and that can get really exhausting, toggling between all these things. So just to note a little bit of the complexities, I'm sure you could describe that in spades. But so first off, let's just say, from where I sit, you know, in terms of how to kind of plan and prepare for this present future. One point here is, you know, I would encourage you to really get the fullest picture of what the healthcare, what the medical system, what healthcare and our social system can offer in this situation to you and to your kid, to all your kids, to the whole family. I can guarantee you the healthcare system by itself won't be enough, but I would encourage you to maximize what the healthcare system can do to share this load. Because the one thing I need to state out, excuse me, right out of the chutes is you can't, you know, this will take this is like so many things. This is going to take this is a team. This is can't be all on you to do all of these things, to be everything to anybody. So so looking for your helpers. Help, like one of your jobs may be sort of marshaling other folks. So that I would first talk to the pediatrician, get a sense of what support structures are available. If in your pediatrician's office there may be a social worker. Social workers tend to be really great at both navigating the emotional frontier here and listening well, but also linking you to practical resources that could help. So that may be after school programs or special school programs in schools. That may be communities, that may be summer camps for folks who have similar disabilities. Who knows what? But I do know there's a lot more out there than most of us are aware of. And so we just got to find these services. And a social worker can be very helpful to that end. So I'd point you to sort of getting clear with the medical world, what's possible there. And then beyond that, you know, friends and family. You know, I think you mentioned there are other kids in the family. So I would encourage you to sort of involve everybody in this mix and not make it just about the care for the child who's living with disabilities, because that can be too much if you're just, you know, feeling everyone start caring at you, you know. And it also brings up a point I wanted to make about the last question, which is being on the receiving end of so much care over time can be in its own way demoralizing and can curb our own development. And, you know, if we get away, we can be spoiled out of pity very often in society. And that curbs our own development. And being on the receiving end of care all the time can be its own kind of exhaustion. So in a way, asking each other, so, you know, like the previous question, the person being a little crabby in the bed, you know, pushing back can be a very humanizing thing, saying, hey, no, you're still a human being. You know, I'm not here out of pity. You're a human being. You need to watch how you treat other people. Similar here for your child, you know, there's this learned helplessness that can happen about being sick over time or being considered disabled. And so we can sometimes overextend and usurp in moments of independence for another human being. So part of the job too is noting, especially over time, as your son, I think it was, ages, making sure that he develops his own competencies and capacities to the fullest extent. And so we don't make it, so he has responsibilities in this too. And that's good news for him. In other words, that's a form of dignity, is being treated as a human being. And part of being a human being is a give and take. So being sure to watch out for we don't develop learned helplessness over time, and making sure your son's participating. And so bringing the other kids into the mix, this will be so valuable for their own learning as they age. I was so lucky to grow up with a mother with a disability. It enriched my life and prepared me for adulthood in all sorts of ways that my peers didn't have. So there's a lot of upshot here. Good communication, ways to check in over time. How are people feeling? How are they doing? So just routinizing that. Maybe that's a monthly meeting. Maybe we sit around, let's talk about roles. Who's doing what this month? Whatever it is, staying in real time, mutually supportive, looking out for each other. and letting hard feelings come too. This is going to be a pain in the ass in a lot of ways. So sure, okay, that's true too. So making space for all of that is something I think that you can do at the helm here. So anyway, that's sort of a general response to your question, exhausting the professional stuff, making sure to maximize that, then working within the family structure and making sure the give and take is set up. And then over time, you allow each other to change, especially with growing kids. The response to this reality is going to shift. We got to move with it in real time. And then holding that ground as the adult in the room, making sure that everyone's participating. They may grumble, it may be difficult, et cetera, but that's also where all the growth happens. So I'm not sure if that gets at your question, Brittany, but that's at least a start. Any comments or feedback?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really good start. I have one question.
Yeah.
Would you recommend therapy for him and for maybe his siblings who are much older than him and are already starting, or they're young adults, to see this as being, oh my gosh, this is going to impact my life? Soon I can see that flag. So that's a big question for me, is how to approach that, and is therapy something that I should be thinking of?
Great, thank you. I mean, I'm a big believer in therapy. A safe place to go and talk with someone who's been around some blocks. I'm a big fan of therapy. It's not a plug, but this is conversations like these over time are things we do at Mettle Health too in our sessions. But yeah, therapy, counseling, absolutely is. If we can afford it, if the resources are out there, I would err on the side of absolutely. It can be wonderfully helpful. Of course, you need to find the right therapist and the right fit, the right dynamic. But the tension there, I would say, so I would err on yes, therapy for everybody. The tension there is how you set it up is, if we're not careful, that can mean like, almost like we're over pathologizing. We're calling something a problem. If someone's entering therapy, we're calling this reality a problem. And then sometimes, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy versus the sort of attitude, hey, this is normal life. This is not a detour. This is the real deal. This is life. Each of us has different needs, different capacities. Over time, there are going to be periods of where each of us is going to be more dependent versus more independent. And that is normal. That is natural. There's nothing pathological going on here. This is not a problem to solve, but a reality to work with. So I'd be really careful how you frame it to not over pathologize a scene and call things a problem, which aren't actually problems. But so that's the tension there. Bringing in professional services like that can send this signal that there's something wrong. So I'd be careful how to set it up, but therapy I think is a great idea. One way or another, your kids, especially entering young adulthood, yeah, of course their brother's affecting them. Yeah, families affect them. Yes, we are affected people. We are intertwined people. That is going to be part of their own growth. Yeah, they're going to need time for their own lives too, per se, and to develop their own interests, of course. But we have to find a way that they come to see that the role that they play with their brother, if I'm hearing you right, is just a natural, real thing. It's not a punishment. It's not worse than other people have it. It's not blah blah blah. It's not a problem. This is life. So if they can get that in their bones at a young age, boy, will that serve them well into adulthood.
Thank you so much.
And just FYI, Brittany, we've had a few comments come in regarding your question that I just wanted to share with everyone. One person said there is a caregiver support group on Facebook, and that's the actual name, Caregiver Support Group. And I guess thousands of caregivers around the world use it to get advice, information, rant, rave. She says it's a great resource. And then another person said that there's a group in Marin of parents called Adult Transitions, and they speak about the needs of children as they transition out of school into different settings. They discuss programs, care, future housing. They also have siblings who are now guiding their siblings. So that seems like a great resource as well. And we'll make a point to put these into the email to you guys tomorrow. Just wanted to let you know your comment got some responses.
And by the way, I mean, probably if you guys have been to this before, you have heard us say this, but we love just what just happened. So please, this is, feel free to respond to each other, share resources. That's so much of what these webinars are for versus me lecturing anybody. This is just free exchange. And Lord knows there are ideas in this group that are foreign to me, etc. So please do exactly this and share resources and ideas and thoughts. That's beautiful. We are going to find a way over time, I think, to this sort of structure, this webinar structure, to hopefully maybe find a way to make it easier to interact among the group. So stay tuned. But thank you guys for responding. Other questions or comments in the mix?
Yeah, there was another one. It's more of just a comment, but I think it's something that you can respond to. This person says, I was a caregiver to my mom. She passed away from colon cancer in 2018. Almost 3 years forward, I'm still exhausted by the experience. And although I do it again, everyone around me sort of expects me to be a caregiver in every situation. I'm also a doctor and haven't been able to get back to work yet because of how exhausted and drained I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you. A couple thoughts. I mean, in the grand scheme, 2018 was not that long ago. I'm not at all surprised to hear that this is still sitting heavy in you. You know, there's a couple of sort of generic comments, but that part of that may be as difficult as it is, as you know, it can be. There are complicated feelings that come with caregiving, including, like, I'm not at all saying I'm just a generic response, but I also want to note here that it's very normal as a caregiver to be relieved when the person dies, when the role is, when you've done the work in a way, when it's over. It's very normal to feel relief in that moment, and it's often unspoken because it sounds wrong. So the person who is just asking this question, forgive my tangent, because that's not at all what I'm hearing you ask about, but it does prime me to say that, because otherwise we have these what feel like gnarly thoughts, and we keep them to ourselves, and we're like, gosh, is there something wrong with me? I'm happy my Uncle Timmy died, or whatever it is. So just to note that. But back to your question, 3 years ago is not that long. And I wonder if this is still grief talking. So if that heaviness feeling, maybe you are still in grief, in mourning, and maybe due to work and other things, you haven't been able to give that grief its full due. I know I have done that before. I've tried to short circuit grief. So the answer to this, to your comment here, may simply be, this may be grief talking, and you need to give yourself that structure, that grace to feel all these hard feelings. That may be one thing happening here, because if we don't give grief our full attention, it tends to draw itself out and come out in other ways. The other thing that you mentioned bringing up here is that that this is what happens with people who are competent and kind, is more and more responsibility flows to you, whether you're because you're a doctor or because of how you've demonstrated you can care for another person in your family and friends or whatever it is. So this is a real issue. A lot of us in this world know this one well. So I would just encourage you to be very careful about what you take on, and make, you can start getting resentful from people asking. So I would just watch it for your own sake, that you get good at, when someone comes at this way, and listening and simply saying, you know what, I hear you. If you're not moved to take this on, if you can't take this on, I hear you, and I know very well how hard it is. But I know so well how hard it is. There's certain things I can't take on here, but I can point you to various resources, or I can share a thought that I had from my experience. But in other words, you try to kind of contain what you offer back to these requests. It's really, really tricky, and sometimes it just makes us all just want to go hide under a rock, which is so counter to why I imagine you're a doctor and how well you cared for people along the way here. So not easy, but being careful to not taking something. You can listen. The beauty of compassion is you can have the feeling for someone, you can listen to someone, give them that much, but that doesn't mean you have to go on and take it on and take responsibility for what they're laying out to you. I have to watch that line myself. So it helps me to remember, maybe someone just needs to be heard. I can do that. Maybe someone needs to share an emotion. I can do that. I can't always commit to time to go do stuff or take responsibility for stuff. But as a fellow human being, I usually can muster the energy to hear someone, share a feeling, and leave it at that, and make it clear, like, that's all, this is as far as I can go, but here's some other things you might consider. So I don't know if that, that here, like all these very good questions and comments, they're complicated and a lot of details would push the answer one way or another. But those are my thoughts. And to your comment, my first thing I would do is check in if this is grief. You may need to start giving yourself daily time to grieve and have a place to pour these hard feelings. That may be writing, that may be sharing with other friends or family, sort of venting, offloading, just getting it up and out, expressing yourself. In this way, you can kind of drain some of this hard energy and find some resiliency again. But that may take time. And if your body's telling you you're not there yet, you're not there yet. No shame in that. 3 years really isn't that long. Okay. We're coming up on the hour here. Any last questions in the bunch or comments?
Let's see. We do have some, but I just want to make sure that we give them appropriate thoughts. I'm thinking we can send them over. Let's try Susan one more time.
Mama. Well, Mama, we may need to take your question offline and then we'll answer it, and like Sonia mentioned earlier in the video link.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe what we need to do.
You want to head to the final slide question?
Yeah.
And everyone who's typed your question in that we haven't gotten to, we will do a second recording directly after this and send out a link to it. There's been some great questions in here, so I want to make sure you guys know that we will address them.
Yeah, and also to note the obvious here, a lot of these questions don't have answers, as you guys have prefaced, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't ask the questions of me, of each other, etc. So I really appreciate it, especially the unanswerable questions. In some ways are the most important to voice because they do funny things to us inside. So again, I so appreciate everyone's willingness to share. Okay, let's get to that last slide here. So we try to end all our webinars now with a sort of prompt. So here's our prompt for this one. Where do you go to find helpful resources for caregiving? We try to ask questions that would be helpful for many people to hear the answer to. So shoot us an email with your answer to this question if you're up for it, and then we'll share it to the group. And then this is the way we can, keep learning from each other. So that's it for now, guys. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I really appreciate you guys bringing yourselves to this little mix. I hope you find it useful. All feedback welcome. And anyway, we'll see you guys soon. Thanks very much.